another highlight of my day. I'm just going to read because I need to. I felt he expressed himself beautifully, as usually he does. I know you're familiar with Gil Troy.
Yes.
So you should look for the full article in today's Jerusalem Post. But let me just share a couple of paragraphs. He's responding to the article by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, saying that the Israel that we knew is gone. And I referred to a response last week by Daniel Gordis. And Gil Troy responds this way, just a few paragraphs. Thomas Friedman's much forwarded New York Times lament for Israel's soul, the Israel we knew is gone, has demoralized the Jewish world. Feeding off the disgust many share for Itamar Ben-Gvir's bigotry, Friedman has gone too far again. I'm upset with him and with all those upset by him. The Israel I and so many others know is not the Israel that Friedman ever bothered to know or the New York Times deigns to cover. So let's say to the I wash my hands of Israel crowd, the Israel we know still lives with all its flaws and challenges, its greatness and possibilities. Rather than jumping ship, we're swabbing the deck. Rather than giving up on Israel because of some politicians, we won't give up on our lifelong mission to make Israel the best it can be. Beyond overlooking so many liberal democratic trends still thriving in Israel, Friedman and his colleagues have barely covered the violence and terrorism that spawned Ben-Gvir. It's like condemning the 2020 lockdowns without mentioning COVID. It's heartbreaking. Many of Israel's closest friends know Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, but look blank when you say names like Yezen Fala, Amir Kuri, Shulamit Rachel Ovadia. These are among the 26 Israelis murdered in over 2,200 terrorist attacks or attempts in 2022. Yezen, 19, was a Druze police officer. Amir, 32, was a Christian Arab cop whose funeral was mobbed by ultra-Orthodox Jews, thanking him for stopping the B'nai Brak terrorist. It's an article I believe you should read. Yesterday, the 25th Knesset was inaugurated. The festivities were dampened by yesterday's terrorist attack in Ariel, murdering 3 fathers. Moti Ashkenazi, 59, the father of 3 with 2 grandchildren. Tamir Avichai, 50, 6 children. Michael Ejigin, 36, a new Oleh with 2 kids. Yehei Zichram Baruch. On today's radio, mentioned several times was the young soldier who ultimately neutralized yesterday's terrorist. The security guard positioned where the terrorist came for some reason, it's being investigated, shot up in the air, claiming he was scared other innocent citizens would be hurt. And so he got away. But this young Haredi soldier, ultra-Orthodox soldier, was the hero who neutralized the terrorist. And on the radio, a few stations, they commented that here is the best of what we have. An ultra-Orthodox soldier accompanied by Torah and doing his part for the security, the physical security of this country. I was touched as I watched the inauguration, and Miki Levy, who was the Knesset speaker, before each new or present Knesset member spoke, he read the following text. I pledge to remain faithful to the state of Israel and fulfill my duty in the Knesset faithfully, to which each member of Knesset answered, I pledge. Ani mitchayev or ani mitchayevet. And as each one stood, those who we've seen for many years and those who are new, as each one said those words, I pledge, I'm sure I was joined by so many in praying that their pledging is genuine. We have to believe good intentions. And now, as an intro into our topic today, you might remember that last year in a lot, what great event happened? Anybody? The Miss Universe pageant. Well, this year, for the first time in 70 years, 7-0, Israel has canceled Miss Israel, which means nobody will be going to Miss Universe. And the reason being, they're opposing judging women only on their physical appearance. Some said if they were to delete the bathing suit competition, maybe that would help. And this brings us to today's conversation in Jewish history. I chose to discuss a woman who had quite an impact on women in our time, even if not in our specific community. And she had to converse with herself and with the rabbis of her time and with women of her time. And conversing with all those three forces was a challenge. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So we're going to begin. Before we look specifically at Sarah Schenirer, the founder of the Beis Yaakov movement, I want us to get a sense of the very complex attitude that our tradition has shown women. And it is complicated. I believe that it's only the later rabbis who really distorted. I'm going to leave it at that. So I want to begin with the Tanakh, and this pasuk says, Moshe ascended to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, so shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel. So, in the Hebrew, Ko Tomar Levet Yaakov, B'tagid Livnei Yisrael. So, look at the Rashi below. You see that God is indicating to Moshe that when you present the Torah, you will present it one way to the women and another to the men. So to the house of Jacob, I'm looking at the Rashi. These are the women. Say it to them in a gentle language. And the sons of Israel, Bnei Israel, which we sometimes call the children of Israel, say to them very specific. You can be harsher with the men. The punishments and the details of the laws explained to the males. Things that are as harsh as wormwood. Now, one thing that you can already say you've learned, if you didn't, that this is the basis for the name of the Beis Yaakov schools from this pasuk, that the women were called Beit Yaakov. Now, just a quick response. How do you feel about there being a different approach? And whenever we look at these kinds of things, and I'm probably saying too much now, we always have to remember the period of time, when it was, and what was going on in the rest of the world at that time. But how do you feel about this distinction between Beis Yaakov and Bnei Israel, the women and the men? Anybody? You don't have too much time to think, so just a quick thought.
Okay. Yeah. Traditionally, it's Stephen. Traditionally,
Stephen, yes.
Traditionally through history, men have always been perceived as the warriors. And that's a fact in history. Not that women can't make excellent warriors as they do in Israel in the IDF, of course, but men have been more warlike and obviously physically somewhat stronger in general. Believe me, there's a lot of women I wouldn't come up against physically. That's for sure. But I'm generalizing, and men are perceived factually as the warriors and the belligerent ones in society, the protectors physically of humanity.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Esther.
I look at the word Beit Yaakov, the house of Jacob. And women, yes, the women are the ones who really rule the home, and the home is the foundation of the people and the nation. Therefore, speak gently to her.
Yafeh. Very nice. Anybody else? Stan, if you're talking, you're muted. I see you moving your lips.
Yes. Okay. I'm thinking about how that hits me today. It's almost like saying that we're going to have to shield our language because of the fragile females out there. They can't take it. Whereas we're going to tell the men exactly where we stand. I think that's not fair. And it goes against what I see is out there today anyway, because
today.
Women, today. Yes, definitely. Yeah. There's resilient women out there as well as unresilient men.
Absolutely. 3 responses that are totally right on. Anybody else?
I think that
yes, Marlene.
That God is actually knows the nature of men as opposed to the nature of women at that time. And he believes that men were at that time the perpetrators of any sinful actions within the community, and that they had to be spoken to in a much harsher way and to understand what the consequences of their actions would be.
Okay, a fourth good answer. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, so let's look at another. We're all familiar with this quote from the Shema, V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shachpecha u'v'kumecha. And you shall teach them the laws. Okay, this is in Dvarim. The first was at the giving of the Torah in Exodus. You shall teach them to your sons and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk on the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. Now, anybody who reads the Hebrew, is that necessarily an exact translation? And I'll be disappointed if there isn't at least one or three people there that don't get it.
I don't get it.
Linda? No? Vishinantam levanecha.
Veshinantam doesn't mean to teach.
It's a type of teaching, yes. Teaching like a shame, a tooth, very sharply, very clearly. But that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at levanecha.
Doesn't that mean children? Children rather than sons?
Who just said that?
Mel.
Mel.
Yeah.
You don't just take good pictures. Okay. Banim. That's right. Banim. But we know that it can be children. If I'm speaking to a group of males and females, I can say banim u banot, but it's also acceptable that, forget about what's going on these days, that to talk to everyone, I would just say banim, which would include banot.
But
okay? So some, let me just please, some read this that yes, it's teaching your sons and daughters put on the side. Others look at it and say exactly what I did, that you are commanded to teach from the Torah all your children. Now, yes.
I look at it differently. The whole sentence is in a masculine, because in the Torah, the mitzvot, mainly there is 413 mitzvot that the male have to commit and not the women. And so the father, it's his duty to make sure that the sons know all the laws that they have to follow.
Okay, well, it is the father's responsibility. Yeah. There's no doubt about that it was the father's responsibility, except for the informal, which you yourself said, by it, that there's perhaps more learning going on in the home.
But that's the woman's
via
job.
The mother. But here it is speaking to the father and saying, this is your responsibility to teach. And it goes on again in Dvarim, Deuteronomy, and you shall teach them at B'nechem l'daber bam, and this is just repeating again. And so it's either, and that's why I said it's complicated, it is either ben, son, or children. And we have heard this from yours truly often, that translation can sometimes be difficult. Now,
but
yes.
Excuse me, but even with the use of the masculine in the verbs, that can encompass both men and women, because generally in the same way as the noun does.
Yes, Marlene.
Definitely, yep.
Your lessons paid off. Okay, and now In the Talmud, though, look what it says. And from where is it derived that we are not commanded to teach a woman? As the verse states, what we just read, and you shall teach them to your sons, which emphasizes your sons and not your daughters. I just want you to get a quick, concise picture of how things have looked in the Tanakh and how the Talmud. Now, going back, another pasuk in Dvarim. Assemble the people, and note the difference here. Hakel et ha'am, ha'anashim v'hanashim, the men, the women, and the children, and your stranger in your cities, in order that they hear and in order that they learn and fear the Lord your God, and they will observe to do all the words of this Torah. So, the women are meant to be there, to hear. Okay, now look what Rashi says. We know this is 11th century. The men were to be there in order to learn the words of the Torah being read. The women were to be present in order to listen to these words. What's the difference? Because I'm going to tell you.
Well, learning and listening are totally different.
Of course.
Okay, but there's also a difference, Bev, between hearing and listening.
Yes.
So it's not saying that they're just going to hear, but they're going to listen.
It's active.
Somebody?
We have to
It's
remember.
active. They have to actively listen. It's not just hearing, and you have to actively listen.
Who is that?
Sandy.
Sandy, thank you.
I actually look at it as a compliment to the women. They left, all they have to do is listen, and they know it. The men.
Very good, Esther.
Bracha, can I ask you one question, please, before we go further? The previous ones, please, you were talking about that we were assuming that banim could be sons, but yet, but the person who it's addressed to, you shall address, you shall teach, the directive to the teaching is going to men, so that even if it is for, we're talking about who is it for, who is it coming from? Like the order is already, the women are not the teachers, it's the men who are the teachers. And that in itself is a bit of
furthermore, it was written by men. So of course, the sages are going to interpret as being male-oriented. Today, it would not be understood today in the way that it was understood in those days.
Okay, but we're not going to go where you just took us. Who was writing? That's another topic. But yes, we certainly had the sense that it was the fathers, the males, who are meant to teach. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. Even though it can be, as Marlene said, as if you're talking to both men and women. Just as if I were to say to you, Tilmedu, learn, that's including both men and women. Okay.
You know, I'm thinking of Rashi.
Yes.
That he was quoted to say, I'm going to teach my daughters Torah, which means that he's doing it against the stream of what was known then.
Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. And if you haven't read Rashi's Daughters, read that. Okay. Now, we move on. In the Tanakh, these three names, Dvorah, Huldah, Yehudit, Judith. Dvorah and Huldah, Deborah, they were prophets in the Tanakh. And there were times that the kings in their period would go for their advice as opposed to
A male.
Even Yirmiyahu. And that's in the Tanakh. We're not going to expand on that, but that's got to say something. And these Yehudit, anybody remember where Yehudit comes into play? Stephen said that women weren't necessarily warriors. This Yehudit, she saved her town from the Hashmonean family that she came from when Holofernes was looking to destroy the town. And what did she do? She got him drunk and...
But that's Yael, isn't it?
That's a different story. That's a different story. Yes. Okay. So just showing you again that we have this way and that way. Now, a little more. In Psachim in the Talmud, Rabbi Simlai said to Rabbi Yochanan, teach me the book of genealogies in 3 months. Rabbi Yochanan took a clod of dirt, threw it at him, and said to him, Bruria, wife of Rabbi Meir and daughter of Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion, was so sharp and had such a good memory that she learned 300 halachot, laws, in 1 day from 300 sages. And nonetheless, she did not fulfill her responsibility to properly learn the book of genealogies in 3 years, because it is especially long and difficult. And you say that I should teach it to you in 3 months? We know in the Talmud, it is rare that a woman is mentioned in this setting and referring to somebody who is a Talmidah Chachama. But Bruria was considered a Gdolah, great. Now, our last text from Pirkei Avot, sayings of the fathers. And yes, it is fathers, sages. Those were the times. Now, you stayed calm last week when I was discussing a very controversial issue. Stay that way again today with this. Yaseh, the son of Yochanan of Yerushalayim, would say, let your home be wide open and let the poor be members of your household, and do not engage in excessive conversation with a woman. Okay, I see your faces, some of you. This is said even regarding one's own wife. How much more so regarding the wife of another? Hence, the sages said, one who excessively converses with a woman causes evil to himself, neglects the study of Torah, and in the end inherits purgatory. Now, one thing you have to know about Pirkei Avot, usually, certainly in the first few chapters, there are 6, each Mishnah has 3 different sayings, teachings, and there is always a connection between them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got to keep that in mind. Now, what is said right before don't engage in excessive conversation with a woman? What are we being told? And it's everybody. What are we all being told to do? Look at it and tell me.
To be hospitable.
Okay, Hachnasat Orchim, which we just read about last week's Parsha. Okay, now, can anybody, I'm going to give you a moment. What is the connection? What is possible connection between being hospitable, whether it's somebody who's poor or not, just being hospitable, what could possibly be the connection between making sure you invite people over and then saying, and don't talk too much with your wife? And by the way, let me point this out. You see in the Hebrew, I highlighted two different words, sicha and ha'isha. Sicha, ha'isha. And the translation in English loses that. What does it say? What's ha'isha?
The woman.
The woman. And what does it say in the English? Excessive conversation with?
A woman.
A woman. Okay? Now go back to what I just asked you and pay attention to that. And we're going to explain sicha in a moment. But can you make any connection between invite people over and don't talk too much to your wife? Because it's not just saying don't talk to any woman. The translation, a woman, is poor.
I'm just thinking.
It's ha'isha.
I'm just thinking that you want to make sure you are entertaining your guest or talking with your guest and not leaving him out. So if you're going to talk to your wife while you have your guest, you may neglect him.
Okay, that's one way. Anybody else? Well, some of the Parshanim say,
could it be even your wife?
What would that do?
Because don't talk to it says ha'isha, to me it means your wife. Your wife. So if you pay attention to your wife, if one of the guests is a woman, he's not told not to talk to her. But don't spend your time as a host with your wife.
Okay, that's similar to what Beth just said.
In other words, the guests are second thought.
Okay.
I have a different angle. If you're being hospitable, who is going to do most of the work? It's the wife. She's going to do all the cooking and stuff. And if you prevent her from doing all that work, then you're not being hospitable.
Okay. All right. Now, we know, I'm sure there are some men sitting in the class that do some cooking, but in those days, for sure. Okay. Now, some of these bits of wisdom are very practical. And some of the commentators read it very practically and say, not just what Brenda said, that you have to let the woman prepare, even though, note, last week, Avram didn't just tell Sarah to cook, but he also. But if you look at that parsha very carefully, I shouldn't do this, but
Bracha, I'm looking
he does, wait, Esther, please. You don't, let's say your husband has gone to shul and you're at home and he invites people over and he gives you a call. It's not Shabbat, it's Monday morning. He's gone to Minyan and he's bringing people over. And if he says too much to you, that these are important guests or whatever, if he says too much, you're going to get nervous and you're going to want to make this and make that, go out to Loblaws and buy more stuff. Don't do that. I know this might sound a little trivial, but saying don't do that. Don't say too much to make your wife nervous. That's one thing. But on a different level, I have to explain the word sicha. Sicha means conversation, but it usually in the Talmud refers to idle conversation. Listen very carefully, please.
That was my point.
Don't just learn, but listen, as somebody said a few minutes ago. You are not to talk only gossip or something trivial with your wife. you should look at your wife, and this is in the time of the Talmud, as somebody who you can share your deepest thoughts and even talk in depth, profound thoughts. And that's why, again, the English loses some of that significance, that be sure, if you have any gossip to do, better you should do it with your chavrusa, your learning partner. But your time with your wife is very valuable. And it's so valuable that you might decide you're not going to ever invite people over to your house because you want to talk to your wife. Okay.
I look at it differently because I'm thinking of a Haredi household. Your job is to study Torah, and all the time that you spend with your wife rather than studying Torah is a negative.
But that's your perspective now based on what a certain population does. And that's why I say that some have distorted original principles. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some ultra-Orthodox that do have,
of course not,
serious conversations with their wives.
Of course they do.
Okay, now, I want to go on. Now, something else to keep in mind, why women's education was not right up there as a priority. Women were not obligated to do all the mitzvahs, especially those that are called mitzvot aseh shazman grama, that you have to do at a prescribed time. Now, why? Because women were involved with probably the most important thing, activity, getting children ready for the day, etc., etc. Now, if you don't have to perform a certain mitzvah, then you don't necessarily have to learn about it. I'm just sharing with you the train of thought. Why you hear of academies for males, but not for women early on. Women would learn mitzvahs like challah, about family purity, tarat mishpacha, hadlakat nerot, candle lighting. And they would learn enough Hebrew to be able to read a siddur. And their guidance was from their mothers or their grandmothers in the home. No formal Jewish education. Yet, and this is why I believe somebody who's a feminist was a feminist going all the way back to Paro's daughter. So always there was a handful of women in traditional Jewish communities who did become educated. And there were two categories that those women could be divided in. And this takes us back to Vishinantam, Levanecha, those who believe that it is an instruction to teach your sons. Well, let's say you're a girl in a family where there are no sons. The commandment was to whom to teach? To the father, to the parent. So in order for the parent to fulfill his obligation to teach, he then had to teach the daughter. That's one category. Then there were other females who would learn just because they'd hear their brothers and father learning together. Mm-hmm. You know, it reminds me when I had a group in my house of women, and sometimes Bat, you would hear from upstairs, the learning going on. Now, where did the impetus come to, yes, create formal Jewish education for females? The woman that we're focusing on, the great woman, Sarah Schenirer, was born in Krakow, Poland in 1883 to a family of Belzer Hasidim. And she died too young in Krakow in 1935. She had been married, divorced, and then she got married later in life. Did not have her own biological children, childless, yet many spoke of themselves as her children. This is a picture of her. Okay, now, interestingly, the impetus for Sarah becoming so involved with this project of education, formal education for women, came from outside her Jewish community. The Polish government had instituted laws mandating compulsory education, and therefore many Jewish girls were introduced, this is fascinating, to intellectually stimulating secular studies. Unfortunately, the Jewish training, in comparison, was rudimentary, which caused many of these girls to view Judaism as antiquated and irrelevant. Picture this. They have to go to a secular school, and their minds were opened. The level of learning was high. And then compared to that, because they weren't interested, the rabbis, in educating the girls, it was boring to them. We could say that sometimes that happens today, that you underestimate the level of Hebrew and Jewish education. Sarah was horrified by the growing assimilation, and she understood that the only way, the best way to turn this around was by offering inspiring and meaningful education to the girls as well. However, the majority of Europe's Jewish leadership was opposed. And so she didn't immediately act upon her principles and her beliefs. However, she left Krakow to go to Vienna during World War I. And there she was exposed to Torah im Derech Eretz, which was Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch's neo-Orthodox ideology. Now, Derech Eretz, yes, means respect, but it also means Torah and the way of the land, meaning that you learn, but you also live and you work. And she was very much taken by what he espoused. And she would go to a shul there where not him, but a follower of his, a Rabbi Dr. Moshe Flesh, would speak on this subject, and she began to see that adherence to tradition and devotion to education could come together and form a wonderful, self-fulfilled human being. And by the way, just as an aside, she says that one of the sermons that this Rabbi Flesch gave on Shabbat Chanukah was about Yehudit, the Judith that we mentioned a few minutes ago, and applauding her for her heroism and encouraging women of the day to be so heroic. So she wanted to go back to Krakow, inspired. She was challenged, and she said, I'm going to do this. But it wasn't just the lack of support from the Jewish leadership that was the challenge, but also these girls who were in the secular high schools, because she started with that age. The older girls were looking at her and even laughed, her memoirs tell us, at her frumkeit. So she had a change, and she said, I've got to start with younger girls. Why? Because they haven't been exposed in the same way to the secular world. Let's look at her memoir. I could not get my dream of establishing a religious school for girls out of my head. At first, my brother laughed at me. Why do you want to start busying yourself with political parties? He wrote back. But when I answered him that I was firmly resolved not to abandon this mission, he wrote me, "Nu, let us go to Marienbad, where the Belzer Rav is now, and we will hear whether the tzaddik of the generation agrees to it." There was no end to my joy. Although I did not have much money, I hurriedly prepared myself for the trip. When I arrived in Marienbad, I and my brother went immediately to the Belzer Rav. My brother, who was a ben bias there, meant that he went there a lot, wrote in his kvittel, his note, she wants to educate Jewish daughters in the Jewish derech way. And I heard the answer from the tzaddik's holy mouth myself. Bracha vehatzlacha, blessing and success. The words were like the most expensive balsam oil, instilling fresh courage in my limbs. The blessing from the great tzaddik gave me the best hope that my strivings would be fulfilled. And she started in 1917, her first school, without consulting any other rabbi. Now, why is that important to know?
Because if you hear no, if you don't ask, it's kosher. If you ask, it may not be kosher.
This is true when you're asking for halachic psak, yeah, but something that has to do with, she is looked at as a revolutionary person.
So she didn't want to be discouraged.
She didn't want to be discouraged, but if we want to look at it as how it affects, because more advocates for change, particularly regarding women, should know this name, Sarah Schenirer.
Yeah, it was.
But they've abandoned her as an example because for so long, different rabbis presented Sarah, and the historians have presented her as somebody who always looked for the authorities' approval. And modern day women today aren't going to buy that. Now, what I'm saying, without wanting to go into it, there are different histories about Sarah written. And we're going to read something by one woman who claims to be authentic, as getting the details correct. There were certain rabbis who didn't immediately come to support her, but ultimately did. But it was already after she had started and created the first school. So the first school grew from 25 students to 40 within a few months, and then it went to different towns. Her accomplishments caught the attention of Agudat Yisrael. Does that name sound familiar to anybody?
Of course. I think
it happens to be also a political party. Mm-hmm. And in 1924, the Beis Yaakov school system was adopted by Agudat Yisrael, and that was good because they raised funds, et cetera, et cetera. Now, why did they suddenly adopt Beis Yaakov system? Why do you think possibly?
They wanted the proper wives.
But for them, proper wives might be people who aren't educated, perhaps.
Yeah, but they have children, and they wanted the children to have a mother who can cope, and they wanted somebody.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else?
And somebody to talk to.
Okay, let's say that's a possibility, but I'm being a little
Perhaps, Bracha, they realized the benefit and the value of having the school once it was done. And so they, rather than starting from scratch, they decided to take it over and claim that it's theirs.
Okay, good, Shirley Ann. Okay, that's true. They began to see her success, you know, that she had to begin it on her own. And once they saw, you know what? Maybe this isn't such a bad idea. Yes.
They also control the curriculum.
Well, she had a say. She had a big say in it. She was an educator. The cynical part of me is saying that I mentioned that it was also a political party at that time within the Polish government, parliament. And in 1918, what happened to women in Poland? They were given the right to vote. So some say that they wanted to get the women's vote, and so therefore they supported. Nah, that would never be, would it? No. Anyway, ultimately, here's a picture you can see here. It says Beit Sefer Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, Beis Yaakov. Mm-hmm. Look hard, see if there's anybody they remember. Okay, now, ultimately, some important rabbis did lend their support. In 1938, 3 years after her death, Rabbi Aharon Volkin, a prominent judge, Posek, wrote, despite still reservations that he had, being that we have drunk from the water of salvation, that's how he's describing what she did, that thousands of souls of daughters of Israel have been saved by these schools and haven't assimilated, we're going to cast aspersions. Her legacy, educator and Tanakh and history scholar who researched Sarah's journey, Leslie Klein, says the following: the true legacy of Sarah Schenirer is that one person can make an incredibly positive change. Her legacy is the power of grassroots efforts. It is persisting in the face of apathy, ignorance, and opposition. It is the belief that if one's work is truly for the benefit of the community, it will be successful. As Schenirer herself wrote, reflecting back on the movement's inception, if the intent is sincere and the aim is proper, my goal will certainly be achieved. At the 80th Yurtzeit commemoration event, Rabbi Pesach Krohn recounted a story about Rabbi Yecheskel Sarner, former Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Hebron, who told a crowd of people that the person who had done the most for Am Yisrael in the past 100 years was not the Chofetz Chaim, the altar of Slobodka, or any of the great Hasidic Rebbes of the previous generation. It was Sarah Schenirer. She fought assimilationists. She fought community leaders. She fought threats of excommunication. She fought L'Shem Shamayim, for good purpose, for the sake of heaven. And she persevered. In doing so, she has become an integral link in the Masorah. She continues to serve as a connection for girls and women to orthodoxy, and she provides an approach to tradition and innovation that Be'ezrat Hashem can help our community thrive and grow. In 1929, alongside a male Congress, she was at the Neshei Agudat Israel Women's Conference in Vienna. And she says, shortly before the Congress, and so the Orthodox woman has awakened from her long lethargic sleep and has begun to organize. From day to day, her work for society intensifies. With pride, she carries our Torah banner of old, around which all the women of Israel will congregate. This month, all the delegates chosen by religious Jewish women will gather in Vienna to create a world organization of Orthodox Jewish women. It has not been long since we first established the Benos organization in Poland, and already from the dais of the World Congress, the powerful voice of the religious Jewish woman rings out on the world stage. She is no longer isolated, either in her thoughts or aspirations, the daughter of Israel who knows the Jewish sources. In every corner of the world, she has close and intimate sisters in spirit. I know full well that many of our pious Jews will look at us with skepticism. We hold sacred the ideal of women's modesty. She is in the tent, and all the glory of a princess is within. No doubt a portion of the community will regard our Congress with suspicion and fear and see it as a deviation, God forbid, from Israel of old. But these same pious Jews should know that this conference of Orthodox women is a necessary response to the dangers that prey on our sisters from various secularist directions. Et la'asot la'Hashem. It is time to act for the Lord. From this perspective, must our public efforts be understood. Our Congress is necessary right now for just these reasons. From our speaker's podium, it must boldly be proclaimed that all those other women have no right to speak in the name of the religious Jewish woman. The aims, approaches, and ideals of the great masses of religious Jewish women must be made clear before the whole world. The Jewish world must know that thousands and tens of thousands of Jewish women all over the globe cling to the Jewish religion and wish to continue to spin the golden thread of Jewish tradition. But that does not mean that we do not have many problems requiring internal resolution. family purity, luxury and fashion, the education of our children, and so on. The weightiest issue we are facing now is how to combat the public school system, which increasingly threatens the Jewish family. Our task must also be to find ways and means to fight for the protection of the Jewish daughter and her moral improvement. It will be a great day when we come together to collectively consider how to improve Jewish family life and return the sanctity to Jacob's tent. It will also be a great sanctification of God's name before the eyes of the world that our Congress is taking place at the same time as the Second World Congress of Agudat Yisrael. The honor and esteem of Orthodox Jews will be strengthened when at the same moment as the sons of Israel declare in ringing tones their faithfulness to the God of Israel, the daughters of Israel proclaim to Orthodox Jewry, "We are with you." During the great days of the month of Elul this year, we will go with our sons and our daughters, for we must observe the Lord's festival. And this will be remembered for generations as the great holiday of the revival of the entire Jewish people. She had the best of two worlds, maintaining her tradition and being open to innovation. For at that time, formal Jewish education for females had not existed. Just as an interesting aside, talking about innovation, you can see this was taken from the Times of Israel in January of this year. Reform at second largest sect will initially benefit 7,000 kids. The Belz Hasidic, the Hasidic family that she came from, Belz Hasidic sect to begin teaching core curriculum. More communities may follow. Education Ministry outline expected to launch next school year with the state funding institutions according to student scores in math, science, Hebrew, and English. Many ultra-Orthodox communities shun core curriculums at their institutions, stating that education should only focus on Torah studies. However, a growing trend in Israel has seen more and more Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, and we're talking here males, seeking to enter the job market, which they are unable to do without learning secular subjects. With the community continuing to grow, a practical reason also, at a rapid pace compared to their secular counterparts, many officials have warned that the economy will face increasing strain unless Haredim are able to get an education and work. Interesting how things evolved. A few weeks ago, when I had brought in some folk songs and poems back from the time of the Chalutzim, the pioneers, our fellow classmate, Stephen Creed. Stephen, are you still here? No? Stephen? I'm doing this for you. Okay, well, you might remember that he said that I've never brought something written by someone who, Zichrono Livracha, was my teacher, and Stephen used to bring Simcha Simchovich to Beth Tikvah many a Shabbat, as he was an older man. Now, I chose this poem he wrote in Yiddish, but it was translated, The Golden Peacock, because I think it speaks of our guest of honor, this class, Sarah. It is said of birds that they are magical beings, mediating between heaven and earth, embodying our desires to fly free from chains, to reach spiritual heights. And isn't that what she did? Would anybody like to read it in Yiddish? No? Okay. The golden peacock arrived from afar, long awaited. For years I pined for her, in sadness alienated. Golden peacock, true one, return to me at last. Sing me the song of sorrow, of happiness I lost. Golden peacock, true one, without you, what is my day? Without your rainbow colors, the world seems lifeless and gray. And the peacock heard from afar my heartfelt invocation and returned to delight me with winged inspiration. Now her colors flutter like a magician's wand, and my lips whisper serenely a new tune and chant. L'zichra shel Sarah Schenirer, who is to be not abandoned. Anybody?
I just want to mention Bracha.
Yes.
The school, Beis Yaakov in Toronto, near Lawrence and Bathurst. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it is huge. And so many students actually go there. And I've met students that go there, and they're very down to earth and very proud women, girls.
Yeah. They're all over the world now. It just grew, and it took just this one woman. So the youngest people amongst you sitting there, go and do something like that. I don't know. Stephen, you are here. So did you hear what I just read?
I heard everything. So
okay.
I have.
All right. What do you want to say? Don't spoil it.
Okay, I've learned immensely all my life from teachers such as Simcha Simkovich, Henry Alkin, your late father, who was a great husband as well as a teacher, from Rabbi Allen, from many others, Rabbi Saltzman, a whole list. And from my young teachers, you and Hannah, and I could name others as well, because you're the next generation of teachers that learn from the teachers like Arnold Ages, those great teachers in the recent past. So kol hakavod, and you built a wonderful community here. Yes.
Amen. Thank you. Anyone else? Judith Weinberg, good to see you.
Bracha.
Yes.
Just as an aside, I've been sort of reading at it like over the top, but in New York City, there was a festival of poetry, and it was entitled The Golden Peacock, although there was no reference to Simcha Simkovich.
Oh, that's interesting. Stephen? You think we can do something about that? Sue them or whatever?
I'll look it up.
Look into that. When was that festival? Marlene, send me some information about that. I'll look into it. Anyway.
After the high holidays sometime.
Uh-huh. Okay. Are they happening again soon?
I don't know.
No. Okay. Nahama.
I just wanted to add, I work with some lovely very Orthodox girls at the hospital I work with. They're a group of secretaries. And I say very Orthodox because they're not the, what we call the kippah sruga, the kibbutz religious, but rather they cover their heads with wigs. They wear shadels, and they don't wear short sleeves. And they're all educated. And some of them have husbands who are educated. One of them is a sofer stam at night. And during the day, he teaches special ed kids. I'm in love with this man. And one of the girls, and this is interesting, her husband is just a student. He just studies all day. And when I say student, I mean, he studies Torah. He's not at the university. And she's working on her master's in public health administration. And and they don't get upset. It's not that they never get upset. Of course they get upset, but it's this is their mission in life. And they all have a bunch of kids, and this is just the way it is. Anyway, I was just adding that because there was something that was said earlier about, the ultra-Orthodox and not necessarily, seeing the place of a rounded education. And I think it really is a very specific group that applies to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I ended with the bells,
Yes.
How they are coming back.
Yeah.
And even the other day, there's a college here called Hadassah College that isn't Hadassah Hospital, but they have their own Haredi Mossad institution where they are taking ultra-Orthodox.
Yeah.
So life evolves, and we never give up on anything and anybody. And so, and that's that.
Bracha, may I say something? It's Judy Weinberg speaking.
I see you, and I'd be happy to hear.
Something happened to me last week that was so life affirming that it ties into a lot of the things you've been talking about today. Is there 3 or 4 minutes to share it? I know the people on your platform, and they would love this.
I'm happy to stay.
I'm
Go ahead, Judy.
You'll just love this.
Okay.
When I lived at Bayview and Shepherd, and I would visit Bathurst and Lawrence, I had an auntie that I absolutely adored. And she was pointing out to me a yeshiva east of Bathurst on Lawrence on the south side. And she said that was the yeshiva that used to be on College Street where we davened as a family. And it was Rabbi Price's shul. And when the Jewish migration went north and the shul was no longer functional, they took all the memorial plaques with them to this yeshiva. And she and I would go by, and I knock on the door. I couldn't get a response. And she's long gone, but over the years, I have tried. Last Wednesday, I'm walking by, and there's 2 yeshiva bochers standing outside. I stopped, and I said, "Do you study here?" And they said yes, and they were very guarded. And I told them my story about my Zetas plaque that is somewhere in the building. "How do you know it's here?" I said, "Because my aunt said so." And he says to me, "Well, you can't go in, you know." I said, "Yes, that's clear to me." "What's the name?" So I gave him my Zadie's name. "You know when he died?" "Yeah." And I continued on walking east. I had to get to the Young Line, and I just kept walking. I went to the next bus stop, and I waited about 10 minutes, and I felt this rush behind me. I turn around, and these 2 young men are coming toward me on the sidewalk, Bracha, on bikes. They stopped. They took the plaque. My eyes are welling up again. They took the plaque off the wall, brought it to me, and I said, "Is this for me?" They said, "Well, take a picture of it," which I did. Was that a beautiful thing or what?
Yes, it was.
It restored my faith in humanity. I hope other people appreciated it as well.
Very much. Take a picture. You have my email, and send me the picture of it.
I did. I took a picture. I'll be glad.
No, but send me the picture.
And
I need a picture of the picture.
And as an addendum, I told Anna Van Delman, who said, "Judy, send them a donation." I said, "That's a good idea. It doesn't have to be a big one, just letting them know how delighted you were." I have a network here of people who look after me Shabbat, so I'm not alone. And I said to my frum neighbor, "Do you know this congregation?" She said, "I do. Call me after Shabbos. I'll give you everything you need." Called this Monday. I spoke to the administrator. I told him I was talking with 2 of his young men. Right away, he went, "What'd they do?" Right away, "They did something wrong." I said, "No, they did something wonderful." Bracha, he said to me he was going to do some finagling and bring me in before Shabbos so I can go to the wall and take the picture myself.
Wow. Wonderful.
What a week. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Wonderful. A great story to end with. I will not be seeing you next week because we're going from Beis Yaakov. Many of you are expected to go to Holy Blossom next week. From one extreme to the other. There's a special program. So please God, and that goes for Holy Blossom and Beis Yaakov. We'll see you, I guess, on the 30th. Okay.
One final word about the Golden Pava, written in 1989 by Simcha Simkovich. Its origins are from King Solomon's times. You could look them up. And Lenka Lichtenberg put his poem to music. She's recorded it.
Yes. I noticed that. Okay. Thank you. Be well. Shabbat shalom, and be careful outside.
Shalom.
Yes. Thank you. That was
Have a good week, Bracha.
My pleasure.
Thank you.